The engine that I'm going to be talking about today is engine 12. So engine 12 isn't our normal engine. I'm working at station 16 today, but they took our engine in for repairs. So instead of having our typical Pierce contender, we have our nice looking Seagrave pumper. So getting into the officer's compartment, I'm taking a look at the original certificate and insurance from this rig. We can see that this Seagrave is a 1989 pumper. So this rig was made 3 years after I was born. So this engine is a little different than what we're used to. We've got a couple of these that tend to be our spare engines and not necessarily our first out units. And what's different about it, other than its unique attributes and things that aren't necessarily the most high-tech, is that it's got a mid-mounted pump. So one nice thing about having a pump panel that you can come and stand up in is it gives the driver an opportunity to see the whole scene. It also gives me or whoever's pumping a chance to get out of traffic and kind of be out of the way. So it adds a little bit of a safety factor and takes away the convenience of just being able to hop out of the cab and control the panels. So walking around from the officer's side, you can see the intake on the officer's side of the pump. And we'll go ahead and walk around to the driver's side so you can see the other side of the panel. So with this pump, it's pretty similar to most of our other engines. In order to put in the pump, you're going to do all the regular duties in the driver's compartment. And then down here is the pump shift, which is electronic. And basically we have the engine in neutral. We shift this down, and then we put the engine into drive. And you can see here there's two lights that should kind of tell you what's going on. So we want the green okay to pump light to go on. And another thing we can do is look at the RPMs of the engine to make sure the speedometer goes up a bit, which shows us the pump's in gear. So you can see down here it says shut off Jake to pump right underneath the pump shift. So with this engine, the Jake brake needs to be off when the pump's running. Otherwise, sometimes there's issues with the pump turning off. So that's one of the more important things to remember being a driver operator on this engine. So if you come around back, you can go ahead and hop up onto the pump. So after doing the typical driver things, you set your wheel blocks, and then if you hop up to the pump panel, we've got all of our variety of valves, gauges, and handles to put different lines in action. So starting from the right and going to the left, you can see that we have our water level gauge, and we've got a variety of lights that tells us how full our tank is. We have the pressure governor, which right now is set all the way to low because it's not working. But what you do is set it all the way high and then crank it back to the pressure we're pumping at to basically maintain that pressure, so that if there's any sort of jumps in pressure, the people at the end of the hose don't feel that. So we've got our primer, and the primer is a way to remove air from the pump, and basically it replaces it with water so that the pump's able to function properly. And then if you go to the left, you can see we've got our two gauges, both our intake and our discharge gauge. We have the auxiliary cooler, which I believe is similar to the cooling system we have in our Pierce contenders, where it's an immersion type cooling system. We have our throttle, which you can use to throttle the pump up. So you're going to turn left to make it go higher and right to turn it down. And in a situation where you need to shut down the pump quickly, the best thing to do is you can push the red button and turn it all the way in. And then if you go all the way to the left, we've got a pump drain, the circulated line, which can be used similar to the auxiliary cooler, in that it can be used to circulate water through the pump. And then lastly, we've got some other switches such as the panel light. Looking down at our different hose lines that we can operate, you can see that there's basically a handle for each hose line. Coming in, the most important one to know is the tank to pump. So anytime we're using the pump, we're gonna turn on the tank to pump. And then we've got handles for our different charges for our 2 pre-connects, along with all the other hoses. We've also got our tank fill for when we're going to fill the tank, and the top gun for our deck gun. So coming back down to the actual intake that we have here, you can see that it's got a bleeder valve, and this is used to basically bleed out any air so that air isn't trapped in the line and we only have water. And then we also have another intake pressure relief valve. And basically what this valve is for is if there's too much pressure coming into the engine, it can vent excess pressure so that there isn't damage caused to the pump. So looking at our pump, since it's a typical single stage centrifugal pump, it's made up of 9 components. There's the intake, which takes water into the pump, and then from there, there's the eye of the pump, hub, vanes, impeller, the shrouds, the casing, the volute, and the stripping edge. So looking at those different 9 components, what happens is when water enters into the pump, it comes in through the intake, which is right here, and then enters in through the eye of the pump. And the eye has the hub around it, which is basically the ring around the eye of the pump inside of there. From there, it enters into the vanes, which are separate sections of the impeller. And the impeller spins around, and it basically rotates to create a buildup in centrifugal force. There's the shrouds, which are the exterior of the impeller, and as water spins around the impeller, it's basically pushed up against the shrouds. And then from there, it goes into the pump casing, which surrounds the impeller and encloses it. The stripping edge is outside of the casing, and basically what happens is water is caught in the stripping edge, and it's forced out the discharge, and the stripping edge prevents it from going back around the impeller. And then the last thing is a discharge. The water exits the pump through that, and the name of the thing around the whole outside of the pump is called a volute. So it's basically like the casing or the shell of the pump. So that gives you a little idea of the different aspects of engine 12, which is, as I said earlier, a 1989 Seagrave pumper. So if you want to take a minute to admire it. Thank you so much, and I will see you later.